Hello, everyone, and welcome to Collaboration and Interdependence equals Self-Reliance with Niaz Dorry, NOFA New Hampshire's 20th Annual Winter Conference Keynote Address. I'm Nikki Kolb, NOFA New Hampshire's Operations Manager, and I'll be hosting this session with Carl Johnson, President of NOFA New Hampshire's Board of Directors, and Laura Andrews, NOFA New Hampshire's Program Coordinator. First, please note that we are recording this session and all sessions throughout the conference, and we will share the recordings with you at the end of the week. And everyone will be muted during our workshop, so please type your questions into the chat box throughout the discussion, and I'll read out your questions when we get to the Q&A portions of the session. NOFA New Hampshire aims to foster an inclusive, safe, open, and welcoming environment for all, and we encourage participants to keep questions and comments constructive. And for technical issues, please feel free to communicate publicly through the chat or message Laura privately. Closed captioning is available as well. And if you need assistance accessing those subtitles, please reach out to us via chat. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that this conference is taking place on the land of the Pennacook tribe, or Ndakina, the Abenaki word for the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the Alnobak, or people who have stewarded this land through the generations. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our Winter Conference keynote speaker, Niaz Dorry of the National Family Farm Coalition and the North American Marine Alliance. Niaz has been a community organizer for over 30 years. In 1994, she began organizing fishing communities and immediately recognized the similarities between family farmers and community-based fishermen, each fighting to fix the broken sea and land-based food system. She's been the coordinating director of the North American Marine Alliance since 2008, which led to NAMA joining the National Family Farm Coalition as its first non-farming member. The two organizations entered into an innovative shared leadership model in 2018, putting Niaz in the role of leading the work of both organizations and further cementing the relationship between land and sea. Welcome, Niaz. Thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate your time and your work.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be with you all. And thanks for the kind introduction, Nikki, and for the NOFA New Hampshire team for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's your 20th birthday. You guys are almost old enough to drink. We can be together in person next year and celebrate. Let me start this little PowerPoint presentation. Let's see, I don't know if you guys can see that yet. I have to share, don't I? Yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
Perfect.
Great. So when Laura first reached out to see if I would be interested in participating in this conversation, I think the first thing was, well, NOFA New Hampshire is a member of National Family Farm Coalition. Supporting our members and the work that you all do is a no-brainer. So right off the bat, it was like, yeah, of course, if that's what you need from us, that's what I'm happy to do. But then when she mentioned the topic, and that really interested me even more. It's a subject that I've been thinking about for a long time. I'm an organizer, and I've been a community organizer for most of my adult life. And I feel like the concept of collaboration and interdependence and going beyond the individual to a community scale level of work is just the only way to really gain power and to get to the wins that we feel like we need to get to. But even beyond that, I think I was just saying on the call before we opened the floodgates here that about 2 years ago to the date, I was at NOFA Vermont's winter gathering that had a similar focus. I think the title of their gathering was Celebrating Our Interdependence. And a couple of weeks later at NOFA Connecticut, again with a similar title of something to do with interdependence and self-reliance. And so it's a topic that I feel like I get called to talk about a lot, and it's something that turns in my head quite a bit. And in fact, the NOFA Connecticut gathering was the last time I traveled before the COVID lockdowns happened. So it was a memorable event. And in fact, in many ways, at least for me, the experience of COVID and this global pandemic, or depending on who you ask, an endemic at this point, has been a lesson in collaboration and in interdependence. We've come to learn how much we have in common. You know, I was about 20 years ago, was it in 2003-ish, I was visiting my aunt in Manhattan. She lived in a small 400 or 500 square foot Manhattan studio. And my dad was there, and a bunch of us were visiting her, and a blizzard hit. And suddenly we were stuck together, and the 6 of us in this small studio for a couple of days. And my dad's comment was that he liked the small area that we were in because we could feel each other's breath. And I thought, really, over the last couple of years, what we've learned about how our breath, our individual breath, is interconnected with each other. We are affecting each other in ways we don't even recognize by just simply breathing and existing. And so our interconnectedness really kind of has come to shine in this pandemic, for good or for bad. And then we've come to realize, whether it's through our breath or other actions, how much our individual efforts, our individual body functions have ripple effects across our society and across the globe. So it's been an interesting lesson for me to learn about. We also learned, sorry, I tend to lose my voice about this time of day. So ignore the fact that it's happening. I've learned to live with it. So hopefully it won't affect our conversation here together. But some of the other ways of that the pandemic has brought forth examples, and that's my dog in the back with the jingle, and he'll be part of the conversation here and there as well. Some of the other ways that the pandemic has brought forth some lessons in collaboration, interdependence, is that we've learned to take care of each other a little bit differently. You know, the number of people who have looked after each other, looked after family, we've learned to feed each other in whole different ways. We've learned to just recognize that our most smallest community is really interconnected with each other, and what it takes to really nurture each other. And when the rubber meets the road about farming and fishing and ranching and our food system, all these new models of aggregation and distribution have come forth that I really do hope get to stick around a little bit longer. Here in Gloucester, where I live, in Massachusetts, there is a couple of businesses that got started. There is one called Mass Food Delivery that has been aggregating all kinds of foods, both raw and prepared foods, from providers all over central Massachusetts, western Massachusetts, and delivering them to our homes. And there is another one north of Boston. There are many that have happened, many right out of the gate. In the first year of the pandemic, we heard about community-supported fishery and community-supported agriculture businesses selling out of shares because their community recognized that there was actually a farm not very far. There was a boat not very far, and where the supermarket is where they would go before. Now they had resources that they didn't really pay attention to before. And so those, to me, were all lessons in recognizing our interdependence in a really practical way for folks, in the way that I hope sticks. I was mentioning earlier that one of my secret hopes has been that this lasts long enough for these habits to become permanent habits, not just something we're doing in the middle of a pandemic. And then I also wonder why we think of some of the lessons we learned in the pandemic, we're learning in this moment to be interdependent, to be working with each other. Why is it that we think of it as a stopgap measure? something that's tiding us over, well, till we get back to so-called normal. And then I started to kind of look around, and I realized that we're taught to be individuals, to really look after self first. You know, all these quotes about you prove to them that you can't survive without them, that you should do things by yourself. You know, only a weak person needs someone else around all the time. You know, these are people who we read and who influence our thinking and have had over generations. The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. You don't have to worry about burning bridges if you're building your own. You know, these are all thoughts that make us think about individualism as opposed to community. If you want a thing done, do it yourself. And even one of my favorite musicians had something to say about thinking only about yourself, although I like to think that Bob Marley was thinking a little bit differently about it, trying to get this out of my own way so I can see you all. So emancipate yourself from mental slavery, no other but than one can free ourselves. And so I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm thinking we're taught, it's ingrained in us that success is how far you go by yourself. And so with the global pandemic, we think about all the things that we've learned as, we call them mutual aid, we call them charity, we call them goodwill, we call them stopgap measures. Yet these are all really lessons in interdependence, lessons in relying on each other. And I really do hope we carry some of them forward. What I also know is that individualism way of thinking is not universal. You know, there are many cultures that think about community as a natural way of how they exist. You know, my family's heritage is from Iran. And I remember as a kid, being in a room full of women with infants, and somebody's child is being passed to somebody else to be breastfed. You know, talk about interdependence on somebody else. And now we, of course, see a lot of women who are producing more milk than maybe some other woman. They're freezing their milk, they're sharing it with that person. That's, maybe you don't think about that as a sign of interdependence, but that is our dependence on each other. That's one of those signs. And then there's, of course, this pretty well-known African proverb that's now been repeated by everybody from Warren Buffett to Cory Booker and everybody in between. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so if our end game is speed, individualism, doing it by ourselves, not worrying about anybody else's bridge, will get us there. But if our end game is to change our footprint on this planet and to be more in community with each other, then we really do have to work together. So this concept of interdependence, as I mentioned earlier, has been on my mind for some time. Even before National Family Farm Coalition and NAMA entered into the shared leadership model, in fact, a couple of years before, we gathered together at the Blue Mountain Center up in Indian Lake, New York. It's a great place if you have never been to. It serves a lot of folks working in social justice and environmental justice world. We got together because we knew the elections were coming. It was actually the week before the elections. We thought, regardless of who is elected, we got to figure out a better way to organize. And so we thought, what is it that we can do differently as two organizations that are working within the food system with the first set of hands that touch our food that can get us to a different future? So we came up with what we thought was pretty brilliant. We came up with this whole thing called the Declaration of Interdependence. But in the course of trying to move the video panes away so I can see my own screen, but oh, there we go, that's better. But in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to join with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the equity and justice to which they are entitled. A decent respect of the opinions of humankind requires that they declare the causes which impel them to the unification. So we thought we were pretty brilliant. We actually came up with a whole set of what would be essentially the Food Bill of Rights. And I'm happy to share those with folks. Actually, we did an exercise at the NOFA Vermont gathering 2 years ago to add to those Bill of Rights or to fine tune them. And then come to find out that we actually weren't really as brilliant as we thought we were. There were a lot of other folks who've thought about this way before we did. It goes back to at least 1994, Will Durant, American philosopher and historian, in response to a request from leaders of the Jewish and Christian faiths, outlined his idea for a Declaration of Interdependence, launched at a gala dinner at Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, March 22nd, 1945. This is the declaration that they came up with. You can go to this website to check it out. I won't take the time to read that. From 1944, we go to 1969, the unanimous Declaration of Interdependence by Clifford Humphrey. Humphrey's manifesto suggested that the world needed to break from the attractive illusion of independence and be governed by a new principle, interdependence, if it wished to be aligned with the laws of nature. And then we jump to 1992, David Suzuki Foundation, the Declaration of Interdependence, express our values as an organization. It was written for the 1992 UN Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, where portions of our declaration were woven into the work of others around the world to form the Earth Charter. So again, we weren't that brilliant. So fast forward to 2018, after the unfortunate passing of Kathy Ozer, who was the long-standing executive director of the National Family Farm Coalition, we were entertained by the idea of shared leadership, of bringing these two organizations together. We were about the same size, the same budget, same staff, same group of people we were working with. And so we thought, well, you know, for me, it took a couple of weeks of soul searching to try to think of whether or not this is something I can do. Obviously we did. And so out of that was born the shared leadership model. And we felt like what it could really help us do is build a stronger community, build more power, allow us to be more resilient, and allow us to build our solidarity across the food system. What's important, and the reason I use this as an example of the concept of interdependence and collaboration, is that we decided when we did this that the two organizations were going to remain legally separate. We had our own bylaws, our own board of directors, we had separate budgets and bank accounts, separate staff for the most part. What we were really sharing is what you might want to call back of the house services, finance and admin, development about a couple of years later, and of course, my role. And going back to what our brains are taught that individualism is really the way to go, and that even applies to how we think about organizations. Everybody, the first thing people outside were talking about was the scarcity of resources. Like, oh, you've got two organizations, you won't have enough time, you won't have enough money, you won't have enough energy. And people aren't going to fund both organizations. So it was all about scarcity, which is something that I think feeds our drive to individualism versus interdependence and collaboration. And my friend and colleague at Interaction Institute for Social Change, Curtis Ogden, calls it scarcity, because it's really used in many ways. Scarcity is used to scare us from coming together and from being able to build our power more effectively. So under the concept of scarcity, this is what we were told when we were beginning to work on this shared leadership model, that you compete with each other for resources, you can't raise money for both, that you have to pick a favorite. And those of you who are parents, it's like saying, you know, you're gonna have to pick a favorite child. You love all your children, I think, equally. You may get to know some of them a little bit better than the others, but you can be a parent to multiple children. You'll lose your identity as individual organizations, and your organizations won't have autonomy. And so all these were used and were things, and they weren't people who were malicious or had any ill feelings towards either organization, but this is how our brains right now are trained to think about things when we think about collaboration and when we think about interdependence. We went into it with the assumptions that interdependence and collaboration would make us stronger, would help us save resources, would help us have more power, and will give us access to more funding. That's what we brought to this. But, also being influenced by that scarcity ourselves a little bit, we decided to test the waters, went on a 2-mile trip, traveled across the country, 13,000 miles. We visited 67 communities and then listened to what's affecting folks, particularly in rural food providing communities. This is what we heard. And when I think about them, so much of what we heard from folks really relates back to this need for collaboration, this need for recognizing our interdependence, people feeling isolated and feeling like they're not worth anything, the feeling of disenfranchisement, the loss of community, economic disempowerment, needing to connect with others, needing to build power, aligning across movements, deeper conversations, learning from each other. People who are feeding us across this country are starving for that recognition and for this idea of interdependence to take roots in their community and to collaborate with others like them. Yesterday, I wrote to Laura and Nikki asking what has come forth from your gathering so far this week. And this is what they shared with me. And I was interested to see how much of it related back to what we heard from others across this country. You want solutions for the future. You want adapting practices to cope with climate change, connecting at the community level, learning from one another, taking action and advocating to bring about change, teaching and encouraging the next generation, and a need for marketing, educating, building interest in local organic foods and growing. So we're all starving for this collaborative spirit. And scarcity keeps us from putting it into practice. So our one example, where are we today? By kind of budding the idea of scarcity and not being scared by the concept of collaboration and interdependence. We're 4 years into this model, and our assumptions weren't that far off. We actually have more resources for each organization. We've had measured growth in the staff of both organizations. We've had increasing efficiencies where it really matters. We don't have to work week to pay 5 invoices. We've just really worked on some of the back of the house systems, and we're growing our power individually as each organization, but also collectively as organizations that are collaborating together. There's so many examples where that has come to play over the past couple of years, and I'll share one with you. On the NAMA side of things, we're fighting against factory fish farming. And one of the ways that the industrial agriculture is playing a role in factory fish farms is through soy. Soybeans are being grown on an industrial scale, commodity scale level to be fed to fish and being kept in factory fish farms. We were able to tap into NFFC's membership, who's fought against factory farms on land, and the role that soybeans have played in rationalizing the so-called efficiencies of factory farming on land. We had farmers testify, we had farmers join us at Hill meetings, we had farmers participate in virtual events over the last couple of years, talking about why that's not the way to go. Didn't lose any of the identity of NFFC or of NAMA. It just made our food system, the interdependence of our food system really demonstrated itself through this one campaign that we've had. Today, in 2018, when we entered the shared leadership model, NFFC's team was just me and Lisa Griffith, who's front center holding the ice chest. This was our staff in the summer meeting. And there's one person who we've added since then that's not on here, part of the shared leadership team, our operations person. And we're also adding one more person to NFFC's team in this spring. And then on the NAMA side, same thing. when we first did the shared leadership model. Brett, who's front and center there on the right-hand side, or maybe it's your left-hand side, I don't know. He and I were the two staff people for NAMA, plus one other person who is no longer with NAMA. And we've been able to grow our team because of the resources that the shared leadership model has brought. And we were able to get together in the fall back at the Blue Mountain Center for our staff retreat. So what does it take to collaborate and to really celebrate interdependence? This is our experience, and I think it's shared by others who participate in similar activities where they're setting aside the idea of individualism and really going for this collective power. We didn't move to scarcity. We stayed in the good part of town. We collaborated very deeply. We had opportunities where we celebrated both our individuality and our interdependence. We brought a lot of humility to the table, knowing that we don't know it all. We're venturing into uncharted territory here, and we need to learn. We need to ask for help. We both became very generous with what we were learning. There's actually a case study that is being done around this by the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, so that other nonprofit organizations who want to do a similar model can learn from both what we did wrong and what we did well. And also we were on the receiving end of a lot of people's generosity. And ultimately, transparency was really a key element of what it took to get us here. So what I want to hear a little bit, and we're going to give you some time to do this, is what are your examples? You know, I just shared with you our example of what a concept of interdependence and collaboration that has strengthened two organizations that were working separately before. And so I'm curious to hear from you 3 to 5 things, and it could be 3 to 5 things in each of these categories, or 3 to 5 things total. What represents scarcity to you? What are some of the ways it shows up in your work, in your organizations, in your life as farmers and food providers? What do you hope for and want to learn about collaboration and about interdependence? And what have you done? What are your experiences in collaboration and celebrating interdependence that the rest of us can learn from? And we're going to give you about 5 minutes or 6 minutes. And in order to keep you inspired, we're going to play this little video that has good music. So if you want to get up and dance, that's fine too. But you can use the chat to write your responses to these 3 questions. So here we go. We have till the music ends.
Interdependence. 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 Interdependence makes our world go round, from the light of the sun to the soil on the ground. Everything's connected so perfectly, working together but independently. They may not be family, they may not be friends, but they still need each other to survive in the end. Interdependence. 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 Producers create food that they need by using the sun's energy. Consumers can't make their own food, so they need producers, and it's all good. Decomposers help their community by breaking waste down. They return nutrients to the ground. They may may not be family, they may not be friends, but they still need each other to survive in the end. Interdependence. 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 Interdependence, that is the key. I need you and you depend on me. Working together, that is the goal. Living together, we make each other whole. We may not be family, we may not be friends, but we still need each other to survive in the end. Interdependence. 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 What is a food chain? It's a circle of life. It's plants and animals all intertwined, sharing the energy from the sun, providing life to everyone. They may not be family, they may not be friends, but they still need each other to survive in the end. Interdependence. 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 Interdependence makes our world go round, from the light of the sun to the soil on the ground. Everything's connected so perfectly, working together but independently. They may not be family, they may not be friends, but they still need each other to survive in the end. They may not be family, they may not be friends, but they still need each other to survive in the end. Interdependence. 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 You're listening to a Biting Reality production. 4A in the house. And I'm out.
Whoop, wait, where'd it go? Can't seem to get back to my slides. Oh, there we go. So in case you didn't catch that at the end, this person, Clay Cook, produced that, and apparently he did it for his either 9th grade or 5th grade class to teach them about interdependence, particularly focused on the food chain. So I welcome anybody who wants to share, or if Nikki and Laura, you guys have some you want to highlight, it'd be great to hear.
Thank you. And I tried to put the questions in the chat too. I paraphrased them from that original slide. But we have a few responses here, and I have one I can verbalize too. But Ruth says, intersharing with younger farmer as we age and allow for generation shifts and caring for a farm. Kathy says, collaboration. Collaboration only works well with equal partners, not big fish swallowing little fish. And Carl says, keeping multiple generations of my family close together and being supportive of each other. And I had written down answering those questions for myself. what represents scarcity, I wrote financial scarcity. In terms of learning about collaboration and interdependence, I think I'm interested in shared messaging and shared funds to reach collective goals. And for what could I share about interdependence, I thought I wanted to share that I know the NOFAs have been really coming together much more over the last several years, which I really think is fantastic, to reach collective goals. And I think that's a great shift that we've been engaged in. And then personally, sharing with neighbors and also living in a co-op house in the past where we shared everything too. Those are some personal things. And Edith has a comment as well. When organizations I've worked with have collaborated on films and accompanying panels, one of the best things we achieved was a broadened audience. The partnership also allowed in some situations one organization to develop marketing materials while the other did more of the research and outreach for the film and panelists.
Thanks for that. And Edith, I think what you just laid out is kind of two pieces. One is that you guys all identified in over this last week. One is building more power. And the other is some of the marketing materials that you were talking about. And this, this kind of collaboration allows us to bring our best skills to the table and not try to be everything to everybody and really be the best that we can be. I don't know how to bake, but I like cookies. And so, I'm not going to learn how to bake because every time I've tried, I've just been a failure, but I know how to cook. So it's, this idea of bringing what you know and what you're good at as part of the collaboration is kind of a critical part of staying yourself and saving resources. And yet at the same time, you got dessert and you got the main meal, it's to get both of it on the table. So, and then the NOFA example, the NOFA Interstate Council is a really good example of organizations. What is it, 7 organizations coming together?
Yes.
Yeah, there's one state that doesn't have a NOFA. I forget which one that is. Maine?
Maine has it. Yeah, they're different, but we
They
do.
have MOFA.
Yeah, MOFGA.
Yeah.
Not NOFA, but MOFGA.
Yeah, so having this NOFA Interstate Council to collaborate together, particularly on policy, I feel like it's really a great sign of collaboration and being interdependent on each other without zapping into all of your resources. And your question or your thought, Nikki, about the scarcity around funding is probably the most common thing everybody experiences. And I'll just share my own story around letting go of inhibitions around funding in particular, because I feel like the scarcity around funding comes mostly because most of us don't like to ask for money. And suddenly you got to ask for money for a bigger group of people. And how do you do it? And so there were 2 things that really have helped me become better, both at letting go of that scarcity mental state when it comes to funding, but also becoming better, hopefully, at fundraising, period. One of it is I stopped thinking of it as fundraising and I started thinking of it as storytelling. Because in many ways, really talking with funders is telling the story of our work. And I love telling the story of our work because we're doing some pretty kick-ass work. And I think we need to tell it to more people. And so being able to be a storyteller rather than a fundraiser is something that I've sort of has morphed in my head over time. But it really started with a conversation I had with a friend of mine back in 2011. I did a cross-country trip. I do a lot of cross-country trips, as you can imagine. And I stopped to see him. He had just taken the job as the head of Sierra Club. And we used to work at Greenpeace together. And I told him, I said, Mike, I love my job, but this fundraising part is kicking my butt. And he said something that I really appreciated and I needed to hear at the time. He said, fundraising is nothing but organizing, and you're one of the best organizers I know. And I don't want to compliment myself, but I really appreciated hearing that funding is nothing but organizing. And we all know how to organize. We organize in our communities, we organize across communities. And if we thought of funders, not as people with money, but as people we need to organize. it kind of breaks that scare element of scarcity. And it really kind of opens up doors. I can, speaking for myself, have learned since 2001, it was like a button got switched. The combination of thinking of funders as a community that I'm responsible for organizing and shifting from asking for money to telling stories. I think it's the only way we've come from being the organizations that we were to now essentially the combined budget of both organizations is $1.2 million and being able to raise that. And so that has been what has helped me in the scarcity of funding part. And I'm happy to share anything I've learned along the way with anyone who wants to dig a little bit deeper into the funding scarcity part of the conversation. Any other things people want to share or talk about before we jump to the next part?
Thank you, Niaz. And I see Joan had a similar comment to Carl, and she said, bridging the age groups, bringing all age groups together.
Yeah, thank you for reading those. I was telling Laura and Nikki earlier, my brain doesn't work on reading the chat and talking to people. It just doesn't, I'm not one of those people. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And if it's helpful to kind of move those thoughts somewhere after the meeting and we can expand on them, I'm happy to work on some document or something with all of you to share what we've learned along the way in each one of those categories. And also to tap into what you've learned, because some of the things that you've brought up, we haven't even touched on. So it would be great to learn from all of you. So shifting into, so we do all of this collaboration, we do all of this, we celebrate our interdependence, and I'm often asked, so what? You know, what's going to be different? You know, one of the things about, again, learning how from this pandemic in particular is that we, as I mentioned the story of my dad earlier, we share a lot with each other, even if we don't know it. We share breath, we share air, we share water, we share the soil, even across the universe, across this planet, not the universe maybe, but across the planet. We share bread, we share food. And so to be able to celebrate all of that and to be able to to collaborate more effectively makes all of those things a lot easier. So instead of declaring our individuality, I feel like some of our challenges can better be addressed through collaboration. In my opinion, all the things you identified over the last week can be done much more effectively. Imagine you having to address all of these things individually versus coming together as you are to try to come up with solutions and adapt practices and connect at a community level and learn from each other. So the so what is, we'll be stronger in all of our work. So how do we do this? How do we declare our interdependence and still maintain our identity? I think that's something that maybe somebody posed in one of the questions, was that identity issue. You know, I thought that I was going to have an issue with that, and I sometimes do, frankly, within the NFFC and NAMA collaboration. I remember one time I was invited to speak somewhere and I thought, whose t-shirt do I wear on stage? You know, I was even tempted with the idea of sewing the two t-shirts together, one in the front, one in the back. But then I thought, you know, it's just as much in the story that I tell that it is in how I show up. Every once in a while, I send an email from the other email to somebody that is asking me about the other organization. So yes, it's messy. You know, relationships are messy. You know, we end up in having to fix things along the way. But I know what makes it worth it is the rewards in the end are multiplied through this collaboration and through the Declaration of Interdependence. And one of the things that has also taught me, particularly after coming off of that 13,000-mile tour and really learning how important it is to connect communities with each other, Now, I used to not really use the word love very much. I used to not really appreciate people when they talked about self-worth and hope and possibilities. But I've learned through this collaboration and through really feeling and working this concept of interdependence, I've learned that I have embraced the concept of love in my life and community and in my work, really began to appreciate the worth of all those around me, have more hope about what's possible, and also really beginning to imagine more possibilities than I was before, because I'm hearing from a lot of different people. My bubble has gotten bigger, and it's kind of has enriched my ability to see beyond what I could see before. Not that I don't want to be with people again, but that's been one of the big lessons from this pandemic too, is just really feeling the worth, feeling the love, and also having hope that we will be on the other side of this, but hopefully in a different kind of normal that is that looks different than what we were living in before. I mentioned earlier that we weren't as brilliant as we used to be when we came up with this Declaration of Interdependence. I'm going to play one more video for you. This is one of the things I discovered along my journey of learning about interdependence.
When in the course of human events,
在人类活动的过程中
In the course of human events,
عندما نكون في مضمار الأحداث البشرية.
quand dans le cours des événements humains,
becomes increasingly necessary
Para reconocer
to recognize the fundamental qualities
that connect us. That connect us.
the truths we hold,
To be self-evident.
Alors nous devons réévaluer les vérités que nous tenons pour acquises.
That all humans are
created equal.
And all are connected.
比如每个人都是生来平等并且联系在一起的
That we share the pursuits of life,
La recherche d'une vie meilleure.
liberty
happiness,
food
والغذاء.
water, agua,
Shelter. El refugio. Seguridad.
education,
pendidikan,
Justice.
And hopes for a better future.
That our collective knowledge, economy,
technology, and environment
are fundamentally interdependent.
ketergantungan kita.
that what will propel us forward
لأن لدينا شجاعة على التقدير.
is our curiosity.
Curiosité.
rasa ingin tahu kita,
Our ability to forgive, kemampuan kita untuk memaafkan,
our ability to appreciate,
our courage,
our courage,
keberanian kita,
And our desire to connect.
شجاعة ورغبتنا في التواصل.
D'être connecté.
That these things we share في نهاية المطاف إلا تطور.
To our fullest common potential.
Le cose che noi teniamo insieme sono le cose del nostro mondo.
我们应该严肃对待我们的问题。
We should never take ourselves too seriously.
kwa sababu jambo jingine linalotuunganisha
هو قدرتنا على الضحك.
Dan upaya kita untuk belajar dari kesalahan kita.
So that we can learn from the past.
understand our place in the world,
memahami tempat kita di dunia, and use our collective knowledge
to create a better future.
去创造一个更美好的未来。
So perhaps it's time
jadi mungkin sudah saatnya kita
That we, as a species,
sebagai spesies as a species
You love to laugh.
que disfruta de reír,
Love to laugh.
poser questions,
Ajukan pertanyaan.
Ask questions and connect.
do something radical and true. For centuries,
We have declared
Independence.
这几百年，我们一直在宣称独立。Perhaps it's now time
That we
as humans,
declare our interdependence.
Interdependenza.
interdependence.
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 on self-dependence.
Interdependence.
So thanks for watching that. Every time I watch it, I tell people I feel with my eyes, and so it makes me cry in a good way. So I'm going to bring back this question of so what again, because it comes up all the time. We talk about all this work and people who doubt, I guess, the idea. I keep saying so what. And there's one thing that for me trumps all the other reasons why interdependence and community and collaboration is important. By the way, the word collaborate, we went on the NAMA side, we were trying to build a network of fishing communities to work with. And we didn't know what to call it. We thought coalition, you coalesce around things. And a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, has been running an organization called the Coming Clean Collaborative, which is focused on impact of persistent bioaccumulative toxins on human health and the environment. You should check it out, particularly if, as organic farmers. And so I really liked the word collaborative, and I started looking, we looked it up. We looked up the definition of a coalition versus a collaborative to decide what to call this network we were building. And we went with collaborative because the definition of a coalition, and I don't have it in front of me, but the definition is that you coalesce around something that has a sunset. You're going to coalesce around a particular piece of legislation that's coming down the pike. You're going to coalesce around planning your winter conference. You come together, you do something together, then you go your separate ways. A collaborative is, by definition, is something that actually doesn't have a sunset. You're kind of looking at the long term. You're working towards something that you may not even be alive to see the end of it, when you get there. But it really gets to that long-term change that we want to see. And so we decided to call the network the Fish Locally Collaborative for that reason. And that's why I like the word collaboration and collaborative ever since I learned the definition of that versus a coalition. So why is it important to do this? So one of the overarching reasons, and again, I learned this probably one of the hardest lessons I learned on the tour that I mentioned was that rural communities in particular, these are the communities who feed us. Many of you fit the bill, both in terms of the rural and in terms of feeding the rest of us. Feel very isolated. In fact, I think one of the most common quotes that I came away with from the tour was, nobody comes here. We were visiting a community, primarily almost all African-American community in Keynote, North Carolina, and the congregation with the Sunday service kept asking us, nobody comes here. Why are you guys here? And so we heard that from a lot of folks. In fact, when I put out the request to the NFFC and the NAMA networks to say, we're going on this tour, where do you want us to go? The number of emails that started with, we're probably not worth your time, but if you want to come, we're over here. And this makes me cry all the time. So anybody who wrote an email that opened up with something like that, whether they liked it or not, they got a visit. They got the pin on the map. And those were the stops that helped us form the rest of the trip. Those and wanting to visit the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, because we really felt it was important to get rooted in the history of racism in our food system. So here we have all the people in this country who are feeding us. So many of them feel like nobody comes here. We heard from so many communities that said during the election process, this one party never even visited us because they thought they had the vote in the urban communities in the bank already. And so this assumption that they're not worth a visit. And also when we think back of the last 8 years, a lot of the social unrest we've been experiencing, the blame for a lot of that has been levied against rural communities. We've branded many rural communities as the part of the country that is full of racist, sexist, xenophobic people. And that may be true for some, but we know that's not true across the board. And so to be able to go there and to be able to collaborate and to be able to reach out and celebrate with them was a really important part of recognizing that this connection is what is going to bring ultimately social peace. This is not just for collaborating for the sake of collaborating or interdependence, just because we want to have a new word to throw around. This is this kind of relationship building and working together has deeper implications than our food system. And its implications will ripple effect across our society, and it often shows up in people feeling more peaceful in where they live and having a more just community and just world to live in. So for me, this concept of peace, with economic empowerment comes peace, with connecting with each other comes peace, with better understanding each other comes peace. This is one of the probably most paramount reasons for me to really move towards collaboration and celebrating interdependence, particularly between urban and rural communities. So that's a lot of heavy stuff that's on my mind and on my heart. And I know it's a lot to kind of take in one conversation. So I want to end this time. And I know we're going to go into having a conversation with each other with maybe a little lighter moments. I'm going to share one more video with you guys. And you should definitely get up and dance to this one if you like. So here we go. You should know this song. I think the opening image there was it Paul McCartney or whatever, whichever one of the Beatles it was, points to a button that says, I think this is it. I like to think he's pointing to a button towards collaboration, towards kind of celebration. And so I like that song, and I like how it really talks about folks coming together. If I had known that when I was much younger, I probably would have played it more often. Well, thank you again for sitting through this with me and to sharing this time with me. I'd love to see if there is opportunities to expand on anything, if there are questions people want to talk through, or even have a bigger conversation for the next half hour that we have together. And I'll stop sharing my screen. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was so inspiring, Niaz, and really appreciate everything that you've shared. And if folks who are on the call are willing to share your video, I think that would be wonderful to have sort of like a community feeling as we're chatting together at the end here. So I encourage you to let us see your lovely faces. And I'd like to kick off the question and answer session, if that works for you, from NOFA. And so you've touched on this a little bit in different areas of your talk, but based on your experience of growing and uniting NFFC and NAMA, what can you say about collaboration and interdependence in terms of bringing more people into this movement of building a more sustainable food system?
Well, I think you can kind of have more, but not necessarily have it be have it lead to anything. It's kind of, using the cooking metaphor again, you can add a lot of spices, but it might be the wrong combination. So one of the things that we did for both organizations is really write down our values, come up with a strategic plan that identified our values, identified what we stood for, so that it was clear to those who we were reaching out to or who were reaching out to us what we would and wouldn't do. You know, on the NAMA side, we even have a part of our strategic plan that has what's called strategic filters. What won't we do? And so, you know, for example, some of those strategic filters on NAMA are like, we will not accept money from foundations that have funded privatization of the ocean, because that's just simply contrary to what we stand for. And for some folks, well, that means you're refusing money that you need, but I think it has opened up opportunities for relationships with other funders for us. Another was, we will not support factory farming of any kind, whether fish or animals. So to me, it's less about the numbers, it's not the quantity, but the quality. It's just something that we talk about a lot. And so the set of values that we have articulated for each organization determine what that quantity could look like, and that it needs to pass that quality muster. It needs to pass that filter of values for us in order to really work in it to our advantage when it comes to building power and movement building. So if you haven't done that as your own organization or as a collective, I would say that would be a really good first step, is to articulate your values and be proud of them and stick to them. That's one of the things that I've learned over the years, is that because we think someone is going to give us something that we really need, we jettison some important parts of our values, much like the funding example that I just shared, for instance. But I've learned that sticking with it, it might take a little longer, much like that African proverb, but it will be a much more effective journey.
Thank you. And Laura, did you have a question to share? And then we'll go to the chat.
Yes. So as you may know, New Hampshire, people from New Hampshire have a reputation of being kind of the most independent and self-reliant in the country, and are quite proud of that. What advice do you have for those who are seeking interdependence and community and wanting to work together to create positive change when there might be a cultural resistance to it?
Patience. I think that's the best advice I can give. You know, none of us are in a fight, or this is not anything that's going to be solved in a week, 2 weeks, 2 years, or even a lifetime of one person. And so patience is really important. And setting aside prejudices is another piece that's really important. I want to use one example. We had that comes from the tour again. As I mentioned earlier, we actually had a few stops that were really about connecting us to the roots of racism in this country, particularly around our food system. We were at the Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, where the first slave ship had landed, and then Montgomery, Alabama, visiting the lynching memorial, which if you haven't seen, I really encourage you to go there. And so in a lot of the communities that we went to, they fit the profile that you just talked about, very much independent folks living in rural communities and very conservative in many ways, more conservative than I would identify myself, for example. And so I didn't know how to have some conversations with some of the folks we were going to visit. And I wanted to talk about racial equity in the food system with a lot of these folks, but how do you open that up, with somebody you've never known before? And so what I found is that when we started to have the conversation around racial equity based on geography, and I'll explain that in a minute, it opened doors that I didn't have before. The first question everybody would ask us is, what was your route? What route did you take? So we would talk about, yeah, we did this and we stopped there and we learned this over there. It's like, oh, wow. And so we suddenly found ourselves talking about racial equity, but not by starting and saying, what do you think about racial equity, but about maps. and which route we took to get to their community. And so unconventional ways of having a conversation that you want to have, and I'm not saying fake your way through an unconventional conversation, but you never know what you learn from someone by approaching a conversation through a different portal than you expected. And I remember when we were in South Dakota, and our host that night, some neighbors came and we were all sitting around the fire. This was one of those examples of geography opening up a conversation around race. And we had a lovely conversation. And the next morning, our host said, I had no idea where that was going to go. Because she expected something completely different and maybe hostile, even, if you will. But it was not at all that way, because we ended up talking about things that we first knew about, maps and geography in this country, and then it led us to other conversations. So find those commonalities that you may not have even thought about that can open up windows to conversations you've wanted to have for a long time. And I can also say that a lot of times venturing into a lot of difficult conversations takes a lot of practice. And so I have I'm very grateful for coaching from others and having ears of others, and being taught in many ways how to have difficult conversations through programs like Art of Leadership of the Rockwood Leadership Institute. So a lot of this didn't come just because I'm sitting here and that's just who I am. A lot of it has come through learning and actually seeking out how do you have difficult conversations and find common ground. And right now there are plenty of programs that are designed for particularly those working on food justice, social justice, economic, environmental justice, how to have those difficult conversations more effectively. And anybody who's looking for those kind of trainings, I'm happy to point you in some of those directions.
Thank you so much. And we have another question from earlier in the chat when we watched the first video and answered those 3 questions from Amy, which I think really ties in well with what you were just mentioning. And Amy says, what I want to learn more deeply is how to deal with conflict or disagreements in amicable ways that are strengthening versus splintering.
Yeah, that's another practice, practicing. Thanks for asking that question, because a lot of times instead of asking that question, we just don't want to have them. We brush them away and we think, I'm just never going to have that conversation, and it just lingers there. For me, it has taken a lot of practice. And again, I'm more than happy to offer those lessons that I've learned. But one of the most important lessons that I've learned, and I'll be honest, I didn't think this would be as important for me as it has been, is knowing what my purpose is in this work, in this life, because it allows me to have conversations that are rooted in how I'm supposed to fulfill my own purpose. And so knowing that allows me to have difficult conversations in a more purposeful fashion. I don't know if that makes enough sense to folks. And I'll expand on that a little bit. Back in 2000, I had cancer, and I came out of about 6 months off and dealing with surgeries and treatments and all that. And I was working at Greenpeace at the time, and I came back and everything felt different. And I kept thinking, Greenpeace just sucks. I really, all the blame was shifted towards the organization. And I mentioned the Rockwood Leadership Institute. There was a training I was invited to, was their opening training called Art of Leadership. And I got the invitation at the DC office. My first time I went to DC after 6 months of being off. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, a bunch of earthy, crunchy stuff. I'm not doing this training. And this is one of those things that if it wasn't true, you'd think I'm making it up. But I threw that piece of envelope in the recycling bin under the desk I was sitting in. I was in the DC office for 5 days. Every day someone took that freaking envelope and put it back on the desk I was sitting at. By Friday, when everything was going wrong, I thought, what have I got to lose? I'm going to do this. And so I went to the training, and the first exercise is you're going to sit on the floor around a candle with 8 other people and do a guided meditation. And I thought, oh, here we go, right off the bat, the earthy, crunchy stuff I was concerned about. But then the trainer opened it up with, okay, so you just went through a doctor's appointment and you got a diagnosis. And I thought, I had this moment of so narcissistic, I've been thinking, did they plant this? Was this just meant for me? And so it was that 8 minutes of the question being asked. So now you're thinking, what's my purpose here? What am I supposed to do with my life? And it changed, those 8 minutes changed how I perceive what I'm supposed to do this work for and what role I need to play. And I think recognizing that purpose and really living fully into it has allowed me to have other trainings that have built on that to really live more fully into that purpose. And one of those is difficult conversations. And so I know it's part of what I'm supposed to do. And it makes it a lot easier to have those conversations. It makes it a lot easier to ask for help around how to have those conversations, because I know this is what I'm supposed to do.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I see that Ming was thankful for your response too. And I wanted to mention that we have allowed so that you can unmute yourselves. If folks want to ask a question on their own, we welcome you to do that if you would prefer to speak, or you can also always put something in chat if you'd like me to verbalize your question.
I'd love to hear some other people's voices if anybody does want to unmute and even share your own experience. It doesn't have to be a question.
Okay, you can collaborate and give a thumbs up. Today I turned 70, so give me a thumbs up, everybody. 70, scary.
Awesome. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
That's awesome.
Happy birthday, Joan. Thank you.
And Joan, where are you?
I'm in Henniker, New Hampshire, right in the middle of the state between Concord and Keene. And my neighbors are right below me, Dawn and Steve Ford. They live across the street. They're my organic farmers that live next door. So I'm very fortunate.
All right.
And a big 2 thumbs up to Nikki and Laura for this conference. They did an amazing job.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That's what it sounded like so far. That's amazing. That's great.
20 some odd workshops that they worked on.
It's a lot of work. Anybody who's organized anything knows how much work goes into curating and organizing and keeping it going, and all the problems that pop up at any given moment. It's just a lot of troubleshooting. And so my gratitude to you guys as well. Ellen Fine has raised her hand. Where is Ellen?
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but on those last little notes, that's why you all have seen me in and out of here today. Is we do our food distribution pickups from all the farms and whatnot today, and so I've been fielding that. And so my question is, we've ended up sort of in a structure because we found it under COVID, where it's like, okay, we're in emergency mode. And we've been at it for 2 years and we're getting a little tired, and like we need to do one more pickup at Trader Joe's tonight, and I've sent like a couple texts today and I still don't have a volunteer, and so we might just forego it. But how does one, if we've been in a structure where we're kind of like, I don't want to say like executive, but kind of, all right, got to get it done. And how do you go from maybe a little bit pyramidal back to, collaborative? And I got to be honest, that word so touched me today that I'm actually thinking of like renaming our group from group to collaborative. And so any thoughts about how to regroup that? We have a lot of folks who are really busy dealing with food insecurity, rarely even get to have conversations. So how do we bring folks in and be a collaborative again?
Oh, that's a, where are you, Ellen?
In a town called Needham, Massachusetts, which is next
Oh,
to,
I know where Needham is.
yeah, West Roxbury and Dedham and, you know.
Yeah. So you jumped the border here out of NOFA, New Hampshire into Massachusetts. Well, it's not an uncommon issue you're bringing up. I think so many times we've started something and there's a lot of energy around it. And then suddenly it's left to 2 people or 3 people to do it. And the energy of everybody else has waned. And it happens for us all the time within the Fish Locally Collaborative. We call it the ebb and flow, which happens all the time. So what has been comforting for me is, 1, recognizing there will be ebbs and flows. And 2, recognizing what should your role be. This goes back to that purpose part, is that not all of us are going to do, I'm sorry, my dog is now demanding a little bit of attention. So what is it that you need of the other folks to do? Because sometimes it's a lot easier, I find, when people have a very discrete thing that they can get engaged in versus we need a volunteer every day to pick up whatever. And you find suddenly that some of the work that takes your time can be picked up by other people. So you can be the ones that's picking up the food. Maybe that's the only thing you end up doing. And so when we've reached those points where we felt like it's down to a couple of us and all the other energy has waned, we've always found ourselves stepping back and saying, are we each playing the right role? What are the roles that we really need to be fulfilled? We've just went through this with NAMA around our communications work. We had tried for 3 years to hire a communications person, and we realized finally, we're just not looking for the right person. We haven't really identified what the need is. And once we did that, suddenly we figured out who we needed, and suddenly the blanks started to get filled. So my suggestion from my own experience is maybe identifying a little bit more what you ought to do and what are the things that, and I don't mean what you ought to do based on what needs to be done, but what you ought to do based on who you are and what keeps you doing this work, because you're going to be burnt out before you know it if you don't. If you're the one that's picking up the stuff and aggregating the stuff and distributing the stuff, and you've been acting on emergency mode for 2 years, that's not sustainable for you.
Actually, I'm not the picker upper. I got the D word next to my name because I hate using the word executive, but
I know, I'm with you.
So I'm the one who fields the phone calls and, you know, and to an extent I don't mind, but where we're at, and maybe other people deal with this too, is you get that core group, and you know, it can be a well-oiled machine or can use a little oil. And then there's some folks who just never ever. And sometimes the folks who do all the work get a little frustrated at the never evers, not knowing their life circumstances. And I know a little bit more about that. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts.
Yeah.
That way. And we're kind of a mutual aid voluntary. We're in between. So my thought is next year, when the seeds and the food goes out, you know, a very clear, you got to sign up for 3 hours of help over the course of the year, kind of thing, or pay a small fee, because I just, you know.
And maybe identifying some very specific areas of help.
We did last year, and still radio silence from a lot of folks.
Yeah, I know. I don't have a good answer for you, honestly. I feel like we're constantly visiting this issue. Maybe others do. Some others who have had this experience, who have done some things that has actually worked for them. Anybody has gone through this problem and emerged with some good ideas? No, I think it's the perpetual thing we all deal with as organizers and as advocates. And it's how do you deal with the ebb and flow of involvement and engagement? And it's can be frustrating and tiring. And I know I sound redundant, but the only thing that keeps me going through these deep ebbs and flows, suddenly you have nobody participating, and then you have a whole bunch of people for a little bit of time when there's adrenaline in the system or something, has been, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to pace myself here. And that pacing part has been really key for me, and not going with the swing of the pendulum each time, because that's exhausting as well. So pacing myself, remembering what I'm supposed to do here, what my role is here, and recognizing what you just said, which is you don't know what's happening in other people's lives. We did this game, we like making games. We created this game called Price is Wrong, to talk about the economic injustice in our food system. And we did it actually first for Farm Aid, because Farm Aid, if you've been there, you can't pass out any papers, and they have this homegrown village where you can only do engagement activities. So we create games for Farm Aid all the time. And so we did this one game. And then for Food Solutions New England, which some of you may know about, we decided to create a table version of it. And this was for the summit that we had in Boston back in, I don't know when, 2016 maybe. And so part of the game was we had these characters we created. So there was, you picked a card and you became the farmer. That's what your character was. Somebody else picked a card and they were a mother of three, single mother of three, has to work multiple jobs. Anyway, the moral of the story is, one of the things that we heard the most from people playing that game was those who were being, and everybody else at the table is your consultants. So you present your problem and everybody else tells you how they could deal with it. The number of people who said, and everybody around the table said, why don't you just do fill in the blank? And now that they had to put themselves in somebody else's shoes, they realized how problematic that is, that all this time they've been just telling somebody, why don't you just buy a car? I'm a single mother, 3 kids, have to hold down 4 jobs, can't even pay enough, make enough to pay our bills. You're asking me to just go buy a car. Or why don't you just go to such and such place and buy your groceries, or whatever that, why don't you just do this? That was the most profound thing we heard from the participants that day about the game, was how insulting it was for people to tell them, why don't you just do this? So they took away from that the need to put themselves in other people's shoes more often, not make assumptions about why they're not taking part in something that seems so easy to them or so logical to them, and open up some avenues for conversation to better understand what's holding them back from taking some steps that may be possible. So that to me is the conversation with some of those folks to better understand them, and not in a patronizing way, but in a real deep, I want to better understand, because this is going to last a while longer, and we need to figure out how to do this more effectively. So what is it that you need from us? What is it that we can do? Whatever that conversation is, may end up being more informative and more powerful for both of you than you might think. Hopefully that'll work, but I don't know. You're dealing with the never-ending issue that we all deal with as organizers. At the beginning of everything, there's a lot of energy, because adrenaline is a powerful drug, powerful chemical, powerful whatever it is in our bodies, but then it wanes.
Thank you so much. And we have just about 4 minutes left until 6, and we have 2 more questions here. Do you think we have time for 2 more questions?
It's up to you guys.
Okay. So we have a question from Edith, and Edith asks, what were some of the surprising synergies and perhaps even new, deeper purposes that emerged once your 2 organizations and memberships, farmers and fishers, began working together?
Well, we were able to tell the full story of our food system. I think that is really important. Before we joined forces, I would go into food-related conversations, and the conversation stops at land. And I would tell everybody, well, yeah, you can just talk about land food if you want to, but stop feeding your farm animals anything that comes from the ocean, no ocean-based fertilizer on your farm, no sea salt on your food, no nori rolls, none of that stuff. And then, yeah, so you can start talking about food system that's really limited to land, but being able to make the connection between land food and seafood has been a really powerful story in and of itself. And what we've also learned from both the fishermen and the farmers is that interconnectedness has been a powerful thing for them to get a sense of, you're not alone. This is not unique. This is, and not to dismiss the unique experiences people are having, but to be able to say, you're not getting paid a fair price, neither are the fishermen. So how do we solve this together? It's almost like pooling our buying power in some ways. How do we solve some of these problems together? And you can go to members of Congress and you suddenly are representing a bigger body of people than who they might dismiss because you just, NFFC has members in middle of the country or whatever else. And the member of Congress might say, well, I don't care, but then suddenly we grew from representing on the NFFC side, something like 13 states. When once we added NAMA to our membership, we suddenly represented 44 states. You now suddenly have feet in the door of a lot more members of Congress than you did before. And so there's a lot of opportunities that have opened up from a power building and collaboration perspective that we didn't have before.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Sharing also the scale of the growth that you've had. And I think we have one more question here from Ryan, and then I'll close out our winter conference. I can't believe it. But Ryan mentions and asks, you mentioned earlier the pandemic's role in reshaping how lots of people see the benefits of working together in a time of crisis. Do you have any ideas on how to encourage folks in our communities to maintain that energy and implement an appreciation for interdependency as things begin to feel less immediate? Thank you.
I think this is our opportunity we always talk about narrative change, or telling the stories. This is the moment because people are gonna think normal is going back to Shaw's, or normal is going back to the supermarket and to what I call unidentified food objects category. And so this is the moment to just keep telling the story of how better the food tastes, how better the people that are growing it or catching it or raising it, the livelihoods that are affected by it. I still turn people on to, in fact, just yesterday from my back door here, a neighbor of mine yelled out, hey, where is it that you're getting your vegetables from? And so just on an almost constant basis, we're talking about this. It would be heartbreaking to see some of these habits go away. Food Solutions New England has a 21-day racial equity habit building challenge, because 21 days is apparently the number of days that it takes you to change a habit. Some people say it's 66 days. When the pandemic first happened, I kept saying, let's have it be long enough. It's like quitting smoking. It's hard to do. It's hard to switch those habits. As an ex-smoker, I can tell. But once you get past that point, you're hooked. I have not had to go to the grocery store for more than a dozen times over the last 2 years. And I'm really happy about that. And I keep talking about that to other folks. And so, of course, the pushback I get, but what about local jobs? What about the people who work in those places? And I get all of that. At the same time, I'm seeing job growths in some of the communities that we had forgotten about before, that are now seeing some support that they had never reached, that they never gotten before. And so this is our moment. I had a mentor many years ago who said, a slogan redundant will always be repeated. This is our moment to just keep repeating this story, keep telling the story. This needs to be the normal that we emerge into as things open up more, as people are healthier, and as the systems go back to where we can be together again. this needs to define normal for us moving forward. And the more we can say that in one voice, and that's where the collaboration really comes in. If our messaging is in sync, to keep amplifying, this should be how we feed each other. This should be how rural communities are economically empowered. That's our chance at keeping this going. And thanks for asking.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that last question and your final response. It's a wonderful way to close out our 20th annual winter conference. And Niaz, thank you so much again for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. And it was wonderful to have you wrap up our conference with such a truly inspiring keynote. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be with you all.
Yes. And I also want to take this time to thank our staff and our board of directors and speakers for all the work that everyone had put into making this year's conference a success. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for gathering with us over the last week to learn more about how we can work together individually and collectively to build a stronger New Hampshire food system. So thank you for being here with us through all the workshops. And please do continue to visit the workshop links page for your exclusive access to all conference recordings for the next 3 months. And I think Laura will put that in the chat and we'll follow up with you with an email as well. And we also have a post-conference survey if you'd like to tell us how we did this year. If you've not already, please check out the virtual exhibitor fair featuring the 17 different exhibitors, including our conference bookstore hosted by Main Street Bookends. And when you do order books through Main Street Bookends and include NOFA New Hampshire in the comments, 20% of proceeds are donated back to us. So thank you for shopping. And we hope to see you again for a few more upcoming events. Please join us for the Farm Bill listening session this Thursday, February 17th at noon, and our Feeding the Family Organic Gardening series, which is 6 online classes from February 22nd to May 3rd in the evenings. And all of those are virtual events. And please also check out our bulk order program to save on farming and gardening supplies. The order deadline's February 28th with pickups on March 19th and 20th in Andover, New Hampshire, Ware, and Rochester. And thank you so much again for a fabulous winter conference.